I'm a little shocked. Last night I discovered that world persistent variables had been added. Now, if you don't know about persistent storage, this video will tell you everything about persistent storage, but world persistent variables we've been asking for many, many years. So they're kind of game changing. We're going to talk about what all that means. If you know, you know, and we're going to discover it if you don't know. So world persistent variables, player persistent variables, and world leaderboards are the three topics I'd like to cover today. I got about roughly 1 hour, although I'd love to do this in under an hour, so we'll see how it goes. All right, without further ado, jumping in, here we are in our game loops world we've been working on. I figured this would be a good place to work on this since we've got some basics like the projectile launcher already set up. And what we're going to do, closing out of this Gen AI tab, is go to Systems dropdown, and this is where you're going to find leaderboards and variable groups. We're going to go to variable groups first, and we're going to start by creating a new variable group. This stuff is pretty easy. So this is our game loop demo tutorial. That's the good name for this world. It's kind of a long one. And then we'll just go ahead and hit create. You'll notice it's going to add to this world when we create it. You could have checked that off if you didn't. You can also look and see variables. If we go back out of here, you can switch to ones that you own. And this allows you to actually have variables shared across multiple worlds, so they're cross-world variables. And they have kind of renamed them recently, so I might use the word player persistent variable, but they've changed the name to be called persistent variable, so apologies if you hear me slipping up a little bit. We can also go back to added to world, and here under added to world we can see the game loop demo tutorial. You'll notice that you can have up to 6 of these variable groups in a world, and if we go into it, you can have up to 100 variables in a variable group. Now these variables can now be of type player persistent variable. Oh my gosh, they do actually use that name still. In documentation, they've started calling them something else, so interesting. But here we can see that there's also an option now for world persistent variable. So let's create a player persistent variable called visits. There we go, and that will be a number variable, just something simple that we can set up. We're also going to create a world persistent variable also called visits. That's dangerous. You can't do that, right? That'd be ridiculous. We'd call this total visits. I'm really curious. I mean, I should probably see what happens. I'll just go ahead and hit create. It allows it. This should not be allowed. It probably would work. Let's not do that. Let's call this total visits like we said. The reason it probably works is because they are different types. One is a player persistent variable and one's a world persistent variable, or as they call them, world variable and player variable. That's probably the reason it would have been okay, but we're going to use total visits, and then visits will be for each player. And those are the two major types. There's one additional one, which I really encourage you to watch the player data and player stats video. I think we're probably going to put this right before that video, as this is a related topic and it'll kind of give you a crash course on it. But the player data video will really dive deeper into JSON object persistent storage. We'll maybe create a basic one just to demonstrate that it works, and we'll just call this sample JSON. There we go. Great. All right, so we now have 3 values, and we also wanted to take a look. I think maybe we should talk about what they are. That makes sense. So this JSON object allows you to store your a JSON object that can be converted to a string in TypeScript, can be stored into the player persistent variable or world variable, and it can be up to 10,000 characters in length. I have to assume that the world variable has the same 10,000 character limit. You'll have to try it to see when it breaks. But 10,000 is a lot. Like, you're probably not going to hit that anytime soon, unless you do some crazy things or you have a bug in your code, which is very possible. Anyway, so JSON's a fantastic way to store data. You can put an absolute ton of data inside of it. Number variables are a lot easier to use, and for world variables, they are much more necessary in some cases. World variables work across all your worlds. So if you have 5 instances, it's tracking for all 5 instances, which can be very problematic if 5 people load into the world at the same time. Because the way we used to increase a value was to get the value and add 1. But world variables have a feature called a counter, which allows you to increment the counter, and that is pretty freaking fantastic. So we're gonna learn about that in a minute, but it's great because even if 5 people all enter the world at the same time, you just call the counter, and those will happen in order on the server somewhere, and they'll increment it upwards. We'll see that in a minute. It's really cool. And then the player variable number, really simple, just a number stored on the player, much easier to use since a player can't be in multiple worlds at the same time. Cool. So those are variables inside of the variable group. We're going to come back to that in a minute. I wanted to start, before we wrap up on our variable creation, is going to leaderboards. Leaderboards are very similar. If we go and create a new leaderboard, we can say most visits, and then sort by descending, and reset never, and create. This is going to create a leaderboard that tells us who has had the most visits to the world. Pretty neat. There is a big note here that leaderboards do not presently work in build mode. They used to 8 months ago when I started making tutorials on the topic, but you had to leave and come back. But my understanding is they no longer work. They don't want them to work, which is really annoying. So if you're at Meta, maybe fix it instead of telling us you don't want it to work, because it used to work and it was great. It was just mildly broken, and now it's permanent broken. So anyway, we'll look into that and see if there isn't a way around it, but I guess you have to publish the world to see the leaderboards working, which is of course not great for testing, but we'll get there. Let's go and create another leaderboard which has a reset frequency, which we can set to daily. You can also use weekly or monthly, and we'll just go ahead and click that. And you can connect it to a persistent variable. So if you wanted to have a variable from your variable group, you could select a number variable. And what's nice about this is it will actually reset the variable for you back to 0 so that your leaderboard can track a persistent variable. It's so good, so good. Definitely encourage using that from time to time. For us, we're just going to create a really basic one called furthest shot. And furthest shot doesn't require a persistent variable. So no variable. We're going to turn that option off and then press create. And now we've got 2 leaderboards that we'll have in our world. Pretty great. Now we got to write some scripts. So the first thing I like to do when we have a bunch of named things is to create a data file to store those names. And I used to call this like ppvs underscore data, basically. It's like ppvs and leaderboards underscore data, but I've got a new name idea. I think we're just going to call this persistent, oh man, I really don't know. Leaderboards and persistent data. Leaderboards and persistent variables data. Leaderboards and persistent variables data. That's got to be pretty good. That's definitely one of my better names. It's still not great, but if you've got a better idea for what to name this data file, let me know in the comments. Would love to hear it. But what this file is going to do for us is store the names of every leaderboard, and you'll see why that's important in a second. So what we do, just like every other data file, is type export constant. We mimic the name of the file, so leaderboard and persistent variables underscore data. We then make it a JSON object. Boom, done. Control save. Now that we have this set up, we can put our variables inside. And what's cool with these variables is because they're just strings, we can actually define them in here. Now what I like to do in the case that I'm working on this is to scroll this over, collapse this so I can see more, and then we can go to systems, go to leaderboards, and now we can read our leaderboards while we're typing. So the first one there is furthest shot, and so we type furthest shot. Oh wait, we need we need 2 different bags in here, maybe 3 even. And so the first bag is leaderboards. And so you do curly braces after the colon, which creates another JSON object inside this JSON object. And inside of leaderboards, we can then type furthest shot, colon, and then single text furthest shot. And so this is saving the leaderboard for like value for the shot as a string. So this is the string value, and it has to match this exactly. It does, so that's great. I'm going to add another one, which will be called most visits, colon, most visits. And you'll notice here that I am using camel case correctly for our variable value, and then for the actual, or excuse me, for the variable name, and for the value we're mimicking the Pascal case, which is more proper over here, I think. There definitely is some like personal preferences here, and nothing's going to break if you don't do capitalization the same. But you do need to make sure that this matches exactly this. But for inside of this, I highly encourage you to go with the industry standard of using camel case. So, and this just looks nice. All right, so we've got our leaderboard set up. Heading back over here, we can go to variable groups. And notably, we have game loop demo tutorial is the variable group name. So if we come down here, we can type I'm just debating. I think we want to call this variables. We'll call this persistent variables, since that's kind of a more accurate name, and then another bag of stuff to store it. You'll notice I add these commas here to make sure that these are comma separated. And then inside of persistent variables, if we had multiple variable groups, I might consider making another bag just for the game loop demo tutorial, but since we don't, we should be good to go into this. So we'll go click in, and now that we're inside, we can create our first one, which is sample. Oh yeah, because normally what I would do is build a JSON folder. I don't know how I feel about that, but I think you kind of still want to be able to differentiate, and your variable names likely won't include JSON in it, so that's kind of a I mean, otherwise you'd have to really add number to the end of these too. So I like to create a bag called JSON, and then a bag called number, since those are the two different types of persistent variables. That just makes sense to me. And so then in JSON, we would write sample JSON, colon, and then in the single ticks for this one, this is where things get really interesting. You need the name of the variable group first. So it's game loop demo tutorial. That's a long one. Game loop demo tutorial, colon, and then after the colon is the name sample JSON. And that's because you can have multiple variable groups, so it needs to know which variable group to go to. So there it goes. We'll add a comma. And now we're going to just duplicate this, Control-C, Control-V, Alt arrow down into number, and we'll replace this with the first number one, which is total visits. Notably, this is a world variable, and I really do think those should be somewhere else. So let's go with the player variable visits. Let's do that first. That makes sense. And then we'll change this to visits. Perfect. So now we've set up our player variables. So maybe we'll change this to player persistent variables. And then we could copy this bag of stuff, Control-C, Control-V, for world persistent variables. Because really you want your whole script to be super readable. So you'd click into leaderboards, and then you'd have these two options. You click into player persistent variables, and you'd have JSON or number, and then you can select the correct one. And then for world persistent variables, we aren't using JSON. So what I would recommend doing, if you were writing this, I would just Control/ this out, because we're not using it right now. But when you come back, you can always Control/ again to quickly add that folder. And then we have total visits is our value. And then we can change this to be total visits as well. All right. Now, how does this big file we've created work? It's really easy. Anywhere we need to call leaderboards, we just type leaderboards, and then we see leaderboards and persistent variable data. And then dot gives us the option for leaderboards, player persistent variables, or world persistent variables. We'll go to leaderboards, and inside of leaderboards, you can see the two values. And similarly, if we go to player persistent variables, dot, we can select JSON or number, we select JSON, and then we see our sample JSON. And so you can have up to 100 of these variables. So I gotta say, I think organization's important. Okay, enough with my organization-centric brain. We did good. Let's go ahead and close out of this for a minute and stretch that back. Fantastic. Bum, 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 bum. Next up, we have to create some way to engage with these variables. Now, we could just tie right into one of our previous scripts, but I think for a visit counter, we should have a new visit manager. So we'll call this visit manager underscore entity. And now that we have that script, we can grab an empty object from our build. I like to move these to 0, 0, 0. So let's quickly move that to 0, 0, 0. And then this will be the visit manager. And then we can scroll down and attach the script, visit manager, and then 3 dots and edit script. Okay, now we're back. So this script does run on an entity, so we are going to need a component. We can then delete the HC dots. Let's get rid of those. This is a personal preference. I just do not like looking at that, so makes my code feel more readable in my opinion. We'll hit Control period to add the import from Horizon Core, which adds this line for us. Control save. And now that we've got our basic script set up, we now want to track the number of visits. So if we go down to start, we're going to add below start player enter world. So when the player enters the world, that's when we want to update some values. And then inside of this local method, we can add a parameter player colon of type player. This stuff should start to feel familiar if you've been following our series. If you haven't, it's a good one. It's called How to Think Like a Programmer, and this is pretty deep into the series now. So our player enter world player parameter is ready to go. We now need to connect it. And I really feel like we're starting to build some muscle memory. Like I said, if you've been following this series, where this is like, oh yeah, we go to pre-start, we write connect, we click enter, we do parentheses. Where are we getting this event from? In this case, it's received on all entities or all components. So we can type this dot entity, and the event is code block events dot player enter world. There we are. And you can see that it receives the player who entered the world. So we can type inside of a arrow function here, player, arrows to curly braces, where we can then call the local player enter world, passing in the player parameter. I like semicolons, so add one here and there, another optional thing, but I like to be in good habit as I also write code in C#, so that's why I do that. Okay, so now that we've got our code calling player enter world, we can now increase the visits, but we want to know how many visits they've got. So let's say constant total visits equals, and then we go to world dot persistent storage. Notice there's now a persistent storage world. That's interesting. I'm surprised they didn't put it all in one. Anyway, we'll call persistent storage dot get player variable, then parentheses, we'll pass in the player parameter that just entered the world, and now we need to tell it which variable we want to get. And this we can do by going to, like I said before, leaderboards and persistent variables. You'll notice when I click enter, it adds the import line up here. We then hit period to get a drop down. We want to grab the player persistent variable for visits. So that's a number variable. And there it is. All right. So now that we've got this set up, we can see that this persistent storage dot get player variable takes a player, takes a key, and it returns the value of the variable. And it defaults to number. So this is most likely going to return a number, which it does. And because we're using a number. For JSON, we'll get there. It's a little more complicated. But total visits is now set up. It is a number, but it's a constant, so we need to increment it before we save it. So right here at the end, we want to add +1. I think because I want to make this more readable, we should put the plus at the beginning so that it says 1 plus. So it says total visits, Shift-Alt-F to make that pretty. Total visits is 1 plus the persistent variable. So that just makes this a line a little bit easier to read. Now what we want to do is see this happening. So we do console.log and then parentheses total visits. But before we log it, let's actually update the persistent storage. So we're once again going to call world.persistent storage dot set player variable. Oops. dot set player variable. And then parentheses, it wants to know the player. It wants to know the name of the value, so leaderboards dot player persistent variables dot number dot visits. It's a lot of dot clicking, but at least it's very clear what it is. And then after that, it wants the value that we're saving, which in this case is the number value total visits. So we'll just paste in total visits. And then we can console log the total visits here. And there was one other thing that we wanted to do when we're updating total visits, which is update the leaderboard. And I believe leaderboards are stored in world.leaderboards. Yep, there it is. And then dot set score for player. And you'll see this is very similar, except it does it in the reverse order, so it wants the leaderboard first. So we go leaderboards dot most visits, and then comma, and the player goes next, followed by the score, which is the total visits. And now we have updated that as well. Oh, it wants another value, which is Boolean. And this Boolean is whether or not to override it. We can just write false here. And the reason we're writing false rather than true is this number should always be going up, but if for some reason the leaderboard has stored a larger number, it's probably a bug, and we don't want to erase their previous score. So the previous score will maintain, and this will just be some weird bug that happened in that instance. That does occasionally happen. Horizon has had bugs in the past where like the variables were not coming back correctly. So by using false, we prevent overwriting with a bad value. Okay. So people get to keep their nice scores on the leaderboard, it just doesn't go higher. Which is still a bug, but it's not nearly as bad as like, oops, it's now back to 0. Like that'll really get your users riled up. So false is the way to go. But if you wanted to do something that just showed current score for the last or most recent thing, using true would override it no matter what. So like if you were doing basketball, furthest basketball shot, you could then override it every time so that the leaderboard is always showing like your most recent basketball shot. There's use cases for it, for sure. All right, so console.log total visits, so we can see that actually happening. And we'll go ahead and hit clear. We attach the script, so we should be good to go. We'll hit world simulation on. We're getting player persistent variable still initializing, running empty state. Let's stop the world. This happened for our NPC is the problem. We are also getting console logs from our game loop, which could totally throw us into a tizzy. So let's go into our game loop and turn those console logs off. That's under game manager function, I want to say. Let's see. I don't know why there's a red dot here. I think that I'm pretty sure we finished everything we were supposed to do while we're making that video. I wanted to look for console log. There it is. And we'll just comment that out for now. When we come back to the game loop, it's probably going to be something we want. Okay. But I'm wondering, I'm pretty sure you can actually save persistent variable data to an NPC, so this should actually work, but it resets every time the NPC loads in, so they don't actually have persistent values. But yeah, we can see, it looks like 1, 2, 3 values returned. This is something about the way the player loads in. If I clear this and jump in myself, it should just happen one time. Yeah, there we go. And it is showing me having a second visit. That's really interesting. Let's leave and come back. So if I go into build mode and then go back into preview mode, you can see it's gone up by 1. So the number is incrementing. We'll go in now up to 4. It is kind of peculiar that it did reach 2. I'm not sure where it saw us come into the world or not, but apparently it saw that at some point. So next up, now that we've got this clearly incrementing, I think it would be nice to see if we can test our leaderboards. This is one of those things that it's very easy to mess up. So we'll go to build gizmos and pull out a leaderboard gizmo. They are right there. And I like to scale these up to 2, 2, 2, so they're nice and big. We'll rotate it 90 degrees on the Y. That doesn't seem right. Check, there it is. Like, that seems wrong. And then we can change the leaderboard to be a specific leaderboard, like most visits. We can then change it to display most visits. We can change the number of entries to 10. I don't think you can do more than 10. Yeah, 10 is the max, but it's a good amount. It looks good. The UI is static. You could make that billboard, which has its use cases, so it's always looking at the player. Let's Kind of interesting how that one works. We'll go back to static. It looks like we lost our rotation. Oh, there it goes. I was like, what? Panel UI mode, you also have an option for dark mode, which is pretty cool. We'll stick with light mode for now. You can do raw value, or you can change it to display as if it was a time in seconds. We'll go back to raw value. And with that, we have our leaderboard set up. We do have 2 leaderboards though, so let's get the second one out right now. Control D, and slide that over to the right. And then we can change this one to furthest shot, which we'll set up in a minute. Furthest shot. And let's see, everything else looks good. Curious that I see this log on the console. I believe this is what we used to see happening when I last did a video on this. So let's go back to Creation Home. Because I remember this was the fix. So maybe it does work and nobody's done the fix where you leave and come back. Which would be weird because everybody knows that's the fix. Have you tried turning it off and on again? It's the equivalent. So let's see what happens when we get there. Any second now. All right, we are here, closing out of the AI tab. Leaderboards have not loaded. Which, I mean, I guess I wasn't really expecting them to load, but I don't think we'll get an error this time. World simulation on. We can see all of this has arrived. Looks good. Go to preview world. We've got our value at 6. Nothing on the most visits leaderboard. So I had an idea on how to test this. We can also check the furthest shot and see that it's got this number at the top. This does create a discrepancy in the height of these, so I try to organize these in a way that makes it look decent, but yeah, that is important to note. So I have an idea on how we can test this, because you're going to want to test this. I can't tell you how many times like that was the problem, is just lack of testing, and things were broken because we didn't test early enough. So since we can't test in the desktop editor, come on, there we go. We're going to go to the Worlds tab. And I gotta scroll this over so you guys can see it. Here we are. We can go and hit preview version 0, which will allow us to preview the world that we're in. And theoretically, when we go into preview, we should see that persistent value go up. We should see the value displayed on the leaderboard, because this is previewing the world. So theoretically, it should work, unless it doesn't. Hey, look at it's working. Okay, sweet. So you can use Preview World to see the values on the leaderboards are increasing. That's fantastic. We can see it just went up to 7 because this is our 7th visit. So good, so good. Glad that worked. All right, so now that we've got that set up, we now want to set up some more things. I think we'll finish with leaderboards because they're the easiest. If we go to Systems, Leaderboards, I think I set this one up wrong. Let's click Edit. You see how I set it to descending? It's supposed to be ascending because the higher the value, the more points, like the better it is. And so we'll hit Save. So I had that one backwards. And now that we've got that readjusted, we want to integrate this into our game mechanic, which is for the gun. So if we go down to our handheld launcher and we click Open an External Editor to modify the script, we can see that we have projectile hit entity, projectile hit world. And what's notable about these is they all call on hit. And so it's like, what do we want to do on hit? And one thing that we want to do now on hit is update this leaderboard, which we can do by saying, let's calculate the current distance. So we'll say constant hit distance equals, and then we have a holder, somebody who owns us. We haven't saved that value up here, but let's quickly do that. Control C, Control V. We're going to change this to be called holder, so it's the person holding it. The value is not going to be equal to true. It's going to be colon player or undefined. So, oh, capital player, excuse me. There we go. So the holder can either be a player or undefined. And when grab start, we want to define the player. So we'll call that holder equals the player who grabbed. And now we've updated the holder when grab start. Now we could leave it there, but it is good practice to duplicate this line up here for grab start, Control C, Control V, and change it to grab end. So now we got on grab end, which does not receive an is right hand, it just receives the player, so we can delete that, And now we need to link this to grab end. I'm going to rename this before we have the local method. So it's going to give us a red underline. We just need to come down here and create a grab end, parentheses, player, colon, player, and then curly braces. And you'll notice that right above, this is no longer upset at us. And then in grab end, the only thing we need to do is say the holder equals undefined. This will save us from potential bugs by making sure that this is defined as undefined when there's no longer a player holding it. It's just safer code, so that's good. Next up, I see there's a red underline down here somewhere. Ah, right here, because we were working on hit distance. Now that we have a holder, we can say the position dot distance parentheses. So it's going to calculate the distance in meters to the destination that we type inside of here. And the destination is the holder dot position dot get. Now this is upset because the holder could be undefined. So we need to quickly check that the holder is defined by saying if holder curly braces. Now this does come with one small problem, which is what if the player lets go of it? We can remove this question mark. What if the player lets go of it while the projectile is firing and then it hits? Well, unfortunately, they just will not get the leaderboard value for this. Now, we could just leave the holder defined and not make it undefined. Like, that's an option. But, you know, if you're not holding it, then you're not really engaging with that thing. So anyway, we're just going to do it this way. It's fine. Like I can see the problem, but theoretically imagine you fire the projectile and the player leaves the world. Well, the holder doesn't actually exist. So when they leave the world, the grab end, I believe, still fires. So they leave the world, grab end fires, you've set the holder to fall like undefined, and then you have, but what if you didn't set it to undefined? Well, then you're going to try to get the position of the holder, but they're not in the world, and then it's going to cause another error. So it's better that this is fine. So if you're playing this game, which isn't a real game, then just make sure you keep holding your gun. Now, what we're going to need to do next is use this hit distance to update our leaderboards, which was pretty easy. Remember, it was just world.leaderboards.setScore, and then we need to call our leaderboards, and then call leaderboards, and then call furthest shot, and then we can type in the player, and the player is the holder, my bad, holder, and then the score is the hit distance, and the override is going to be set to false because once again we only want to update it if the value is better than the previous value, in this case larger, not smaller. Oh my gosh, I totally messed it up. I reversed it, but it was actually correct all along. Switch that back to descending, my bad. I mix up ascending and descending. They're so hard to get straight in my brain. Anyway, so we got that leaderboard set here, so that's fantastic. And we've got one set over here, which is also fantastic. We've also set some world variables, but we have two more to engage with before we can wrap today's tutorial. So I think we're doing pretty good here. The JSON object could get complicated, so we'll try to keep that one pretty easy. World simulation on, clear again, jump into preview mode, and we can see my number's at 7. If I grab this, oh, we didn't console log anything. All right, let's, because these leaderboards will not work in here, we're gonna use preview mode one more time. Looks like it's gonna load us right in, which is nice. And I think this will load the latest version of the world, if I'm not mistaken. We'll know momentarily. All right, here we are. And we can now grab the gun, and if we shoot the ground, we can see the furthest shot has increased. Okay, you gonna do anything? There it is. Took a minute, but you can see I just got 5 meters. If we shoot further off in the distance, there it goes. That should update from 5 to big ol' 31. Very nice. And we could try getting further value, but you'll notice that even with all these smaller values, it's only going to update if we get something further. And I don't think any of those were further. Nope. It does take a minute to update. Leaderboards are kind of slower on the update, but that should have one of those as further. There we go. Up to 40. Very nice. And people can have a lot of fun with something just as simple as that. Very nice. Let's go ahead and close down that. Okay, so a couple leaderboards running. Next up, we're going to go back into our code. I'm going to open up that leaderboards and persistent variables data page because we've checked off these two. We have not done the sample JSON. We have done visits, but we haven't done total visits. So this world variable is really exciting. Really want to try world variables before we get into JSON. This should be just as simple. There are a lot more things to it. So what I want to show you first is where I learned about it. And so if we go to types, we go to Horizon Core, you can find, if you search in here, persistent storage. It's on line 4,600, no big deal. It took me a while to actually get here. I got here by typing Control F. I typed persistent, and then from persistent, I found that I couldn't find it, so I probably typed persistent storage, which got me to the first one right here. And so here I saw persistent serializable state was being declared, so I probably copied this and then pasted that. I don't think that's how I did that. Eventually I found world. Honestly, there's just like a lot of ways. So here's persistent storage being declared and has get player variable, set player variable. But we are inside of world actually now. And if we scroll up, we should see that we're inside of world. If we scroll up, I know this is pretty intense, but this is like how I learn. So I'd come down here and be like, oh, here's the world class, which you've noticed that we've been in world quite a bit recently. You can see all the things that are inside of world and read about them. And notably, we've been using leaderboards right here. So that's an leaderboards, and persistent storage, which is persistent storage. And then right below that, we found persistent storage world, which has this one. So I would have then Control C, Control F, Control V, and then I would have clicked to the other version of persistent world, which shows the interface and explains how it works. And so you can see that you have get world variable, and get world variable is going to extend this serializable state. It's going to take a key. It's going to return the type T or null. So this gets the value. We've also got get world counter. So if it's a number value, I imagine, that's what this one's going to do. It's going to return a number. We have increment world counter. So this is the easiest one. This is so great because it's going to increase the amount, and then it looks like it returns that amount. Unfortunately, these don't seem to have hovers over for some reason. We'll see if there's a hover over in a minute. And then we got set world variable across instances. And so this is going to set it across all the instances. Pretty nice. It also returns a promise, which tells you when it's done. It tells you the value when it's done. You can also fetch the world variable async. And this is because like they're happening, there's multiple instances of your world. So this stuff being async means it's a little bit more accurate because it's could be happening multiple times in multiple worlds. Like this could be complicated. So I recommend for now that we all just start with something simple like a counter. If you want to try doing something a little bit more complicated, by all means. And for worlds that, sorry, for worlds that don't have multiple instances running all the time, that's not a big deal. But I know like Murder Manor, for instance, has sometimes 5 or more instances running. That can get a little bit complicated. So using a counter is really easy. Excuse me. So what we're going to do is use our get world counter and set or increment counter to increment every time a player enters the world. And so to do that, we'll use our visit manager. We've already got this set up most of the way. And in here, we were logging the total visits. But let's give our visit manager a property for a text gizmo. And so we'll call this the total visits text gizmo. And this is going to feel, in my mind, a little like the kind of old websites of ye olden days when I was a child, and people would have counters at the bottom saying, oh, I've had 200 people have been here. And you'd go, wow, that's so amazing. So anyway, that's kind of how I feel about this. So we're going to prop types dot entity as a text gizmo is an entity, control save. And now that we have this text gizmo referenced, we'll make sure to reference that on the properties panel in a minute. We can come down here, and just to see this work right now, let's say props dot text gizmo dot as parentheses text gizmo. Text gizmo will give us the option for a dot text value, which we can then dot set to the total visits dot to string, and that should be the way to go. We can now delete this console log for total visits, as we're now going to be displaying it in the world. And with that, we'll go clear, clear, clear again. Go to build, pull out a text gizmo. I have to pull it out. And now that I've pulled that out, we can type in total visits colon 0, and I want to break between this. And so this is what I want it to look like. Oops. There we go. We'll go ahead and flip that around 180 degrees. We can then turn off autofit, see what that looks like. Control A, maybe go down to a font size of 4. We're going to move that to 0, 1.5, 0. And then I'm going to just slide that forward so it's right in front of the user so we can see these total visits. Very nice. Oh, and that is, I wanted it to be in front of the world spawn point, which is right here. We'll lift that up a little bit. Nice. Okay, so that should allow us to see the value. Now I do want it to actually look like that, whereas right now if we world simulation on and jump into preview mode, it just shows a I forgot to reference it on the properties panel. We'll call this the visits text gizmo. We now need to click on our visit manager and then reference that on the properties panel. And so what you're going to see happen when we try this again is that the number is displayed, and looks like the other player entered before or after me. So if I play again, it'll be my number of 10. There we go. We'll stop the world. But we want it to display like this, total visits colon 0. And if we click on our text gizmo, once we get it set up the way we want it, like what if we wanted to add a font? We could type font equals bangers SDF. Now I wouldn't recommend using bangers because the 7 looks like a 1. So you might want to use something like Anton SDF, which is fine, or electronic highway sign SDF, which is also pretty cool. We'll stick with that one for now, going with our retro vibes that I was kind of describing. And maybe we'll change the text color kind of to match something lighter blue even. Yeah, there we go. Nice. And now that we've got that set up, we can utilize this prefix right here, Control C, and then head back into our visit manager. And so you can like really quickly get it looking the way you want it. And then right here we're using just toString, but if we now add a plus symbol before this, we can add single ticks, and then in the single ticks we can paste our code and then Control save. And now when we enter the world, it's going to display. So we'll go ahead and turn world simulation on, clear. And you can see that updated for this player, so it's already working. We'll hit preview mode, and we can see total visits is 11 now for me. Very nice. Cool, cool, cool. Now we'll turn world simulation off, and if we go back over here to visit manager, we can now update this total visits. Let's change this total visits, Shift Alt F to make it pretty. Instead of using the total visits of the player, to use the total visits for the entire world. And because that's what we're going for, right? So what we need to do is now go into world.persistent storage world right here, and then .increment world counter async, and then parentheses. We can then pass in our key, which is leaderboards.most. Oh, I went the wrong way. Sorry, my nose is kind of like about to sneeze. Excuse me. Okay. So world persistent variables, there we go. And then number and then total visits. Very nice. Okay, and the amount we want to increment this by is 1. So with that going up by 1, I'll add a semicolon at the end. And if we hover over this increment world counter async, you'll notice that it returns a promise with a number. That is pretty freaking fantastic. We want to use that. Now, this promise is async, which means we need to add, and this is like, things are about to get really complex, but it's not that bad. And I think this is a really great, easy example to get your head around async. So we type async in front of the method to make this method run async. It doesn't currently return a promise, but we could if we wanted to. What we want to do right here is await this increment to complete. But what await's going to do is it's going to wait until this finishes before it logs this to the console, but we need to get the value back. So we can type constant world visits, or world total visits equals this await. And if you hover over this, you can see that it's a number. We can then pop this where we had our previous total visits and paste and control save. And that should do the trick. Let's see. I've never done this before. First time using a world persistent storage. I'm excited. World simulation on. And we can see that they counted as 3 visits. Those NPCs be hacking our score up. Which, you know, for better or worse. I would recommend, we'll implement it in a second, but if I jump into the world, it goes up to 4. And then if I leave, and we jump in again, it'll go up to 5. Nice. And then we're going to turn world simulation off. Let's not count NPCs. And I'm just going to quickly demonstrate this to you because that's definitely the way you want to go. And like you could leave most of this in here, but you could also just write if player. It's actually NPC. I think we actually have to add the API for this. Anyway, we're going to write an if statement in a moment. We're going to use curly braces, and we want to put all of this, because there's no reason to even increment an NPC's persistent variable or leaderboard. So we can just move all of that in. And then there's a feature that allows us to check if they're an NPC. And the way that this is done is using a API that we haven't added yet. So we need to go into our scripts, gear settings, go to APIs so we can enable the, is it avatar AI agent? I think it's NPC. Let's go with NPC. Press apply. And I always mix this up. So I'm going to actually go read through some of the NPC API. It should be here. Double click. And so if we go through NPC, we can see the NPC settings and things. And what I'm looking for is there should be a feature to get the NPC. I think we're looking for like an NPC entity or something. NPC extends entity. Yeah, here we are. And if we find a static, oh, nope, it's not in here. Interesting. Represents an NPC with LLM powered conversation. I really want to check that out. Tell me more. I've heard some of this stuff has been being worked on. I don't know how public it is yet. NPC conversation. I don't see what I'm looking for in here. I think I'm in the wrong NPC section. Maybe I selected the wrong one. Settings. Still something I'm very interested in learning more about. Avatar AI agent is probably what I wanted, and I just saw NPC and got overexcited. Click apply. So, wrong one. But you can see like these smaller APIs are relatively easy to scroll through and like see everything that's in it. I mean, 350 lines doesn't take long to skim. Let's go into the Avatar AI agent, and this one is even shorter, just 250 lines. And what I'm looking for is going to be in here for sure. Agent spawn results. Avatar AI agent. Okay, here we are. Avatar AI agent and agent locomotion. Get gizmo from player. This is what we're looking for. This static method means it can be called by typing avatar AI agent dot. So the dot will allow us to get the get gizmo from player. We provide the player. If it returns an entity, we know that it's a NPC. If it returns undefined, we know that they are a real player. But I thought there might be a better one. Spawn agent player, despawn agent player. No, those aren't what we're looking for. Yeah, we're going to use this one. Get gizmo from player. That should do the trick. I felt like there was one other way of doing it though, and I just am not seeing it. So kind of weird. But for now, what we're going to type is avatar AI agent dot get gizmo from player, parentheses player, which is going to return either an entity or undefined. So if we say triple equals undefined, then we know that this player is a real player because they don't have a gizmo assigned to them. Now that said, I have definitely experienced where this is not working and the NPC does come up as a player. So I'm not entirely sure what's happening in that case. We're going to go ahead and assume that this is going to work correctly, but I suspect what we're going to see happen is total visits is going to stay, it's going to go up at some point. I suspect we're going to see the NPC, because you see that it joins the world 3 times. I just don't trust that. World simulation on? Yeah, totally incremented it higher. So it's at 7. Let's hit reset world. That time it didn't increase it. I think in the published version it does work, because the reset world, it behaves way more like the published version. So you see how it like enters the world correctly. Whereas if I stop the world and resume the world, we're getting a few weird things. I think it might be with regards to this NPC spawning automatically, like when we stop the world. So that's probably part of the thing. Really not entirely sure, but as you can see, it definitely is messing up. So you can just hit reset world to see that it does work correctly. But in build mode, you're going to get some errors. We'll go ahead and enter preview mode, and then we see that is now at 10. Very nice. And what I think will be most interesting is if we leave the world running and then we go into Chrome, we're going to load into the world. We're in build mode right now, so the number's still at 10. But because this is happening across all instances of the world, this is a world persistent variable. Theoretically, when we enter the world here, that's going to increment the counter to 11. See? And then we close out of this. Now, we don't update this counter unless a player enters the world. So when we enter the world, it should go to 12. And it did. Boom. Done. So good. So cool. So I think that's where I'm going to leave it for persistent world. We are getting close to time. So I do want to cover JSON relatively quickly. But there's some things we should talk about as we dive into it, because I'm going to show you a really basic example, and then we're going to be like, go watch the player data video for the more like actual way of doing it. Let's see. First and foremost, world persistent storage has a lot more depth. You can do JSON world persistent storage. That is so dangerous in my mind. Like, you're going to need to build some really good safety checks and things, because if you've got 2 instances with the different JSON, they're each going to have their own version of the JSON data. And like, you're increasing it here, but if they try to increase it at the same time, then there's competition. It's something you wouldn't want to update very frequently if you do decide to do that, so that way they don't happen. I really don't know. Like, that's something that's kind of scary. Like, if there are worlds right now with over 500 people in them, that means you've got 50 instances in some cases. And if there's 50 instances all competing with their own copy of the JSON data and they're all trying to write it in, it's a dangerous thing. If your plan is to make a big public world that could go viral, could have a lot of mainstay power, I cannot recommend doing JSON object world persistent storage. It's cool. There's a lot of possibilities with it, but I can't recommend it because you're going to get some errors. Maybe those errors aren't deal breaking for you. I'm not sure where I would use it today. I'd have to think about it. I'd really have to like mull it over and like come up with some solutions that I think are the right approach to implement, because I do try to build viral worlds. You know, this is where I make money. It's making worlds that make money. So I can make these YouTube videos for free. It's kind of great. It's a great deal for me. I make fun games and I make fun videos. I love it. It's great. But the point is, I have to mull it over. It's very complex. If you're building just a world for yourself, which is what I used to do. Once upon a time, I used to have fun in worlds, and it wasn't just all work. Then in that case, it might make sense, because you know you're probably only going to have 1 instance of the world open at any given time. Okay, let's talk about JSON objects. JSON objects are, as you know, the things inside the curly braces. I'm going to move over here. There we go. And so inside these curly braces, you can put all sorts of data, but only some of that data can be converted to a string. There's a feature called JSON.stringify. You can try running that on a JSON to see if it'll turn into a string. You can also use that to figure out what the length of the JSON data is. Now we talk about this and more in the player data video. And the reason I stress this so much is because in the player data video, we really get into all of that detail about making versions, because what if you want to update that in the future? So let's say today we're gonna build something that's gonna be able to store one thing inside the JSON object. Well, you can store up to 10,000 characters of data. So if you wanted to add something to that, you should be able to. But because the way we'd set it up would be to have one thing, we wouldn't have a version number built in. And when you go watch the the player data, player stats video, you'll learn how to do version numbering, updating the version. It's very complex. It's not an easy task, but once it's set up, it's still really hard, but it is possible to add more values to it. So let's say you're tracking player statistics and you've got 10 values. Well, next week you can add 5 more. And that would be like going from version 1 to version 2. It's pretty cool. We're not talking about that today, though. Today, we just want to show a really basic example of setting a value with a custom type and then getting that value back. Let's do it. So we're going to close this. We're going to create a custom type. And just because we're going to be chaotic evil, chaotic good, one or the other, we're going to create a visit manager underscore defs. And this is where we're going to define a custom type. And we'll go 3 dots, open an external editor, and now we can define a type in here. We need to delete everything that's in here, and then type export type called player visits, and then this type is going to consist of a couple things. So we say equals curly braces. So now we're saying this type is a JSON object with values inside of it, and the values are going to be total visits, colon is a number, comma, and then we'll have last visit at, which will also be a number. And so we've got 2 things stored inside of this player visits. This is a really basic example. Yeah, you know. So we've got our visit manager. We're going to go into our visit manager entity. And when player enters world, we haven't done anything with the JSON. We're really not going to use it for leaderboards or anything like actually. This is just quickly to show you how to set it and how to get it. And so what we need to do first is be inside of this where we confirm that this person is a player. We can then say constant, and this will be the player data. That's what I'd probably call this player stats. We'll just call it player stats for now. Teeing you up for the player data, player stats video. And so player stats will be of type player visits. So we need to make sure to use that type from our visit manager defs right there. And we can hover over that to get more information about it, which is nice. And then we'll do equals. And now if we call world dot persistent storage dot get player variable parentheses, we can now pass in the player. We can pass in the key, which is leaderboards dot player persistent variables dot JSON dot sample JSON, and then we need to, oh, that's it. There we go. And so this, if we hover over our player stats, is going to be a player visits or null. It's one or the other, which is mostly true. It's mostly true. By doing this type declaration, that doesn't mean it's guaranteed to be the correct type. Like if you've done something trickery, like changing the version between updates of your world, you might actually return an impartial player visits. Or if you change it to a completely different type, you could be returning a player visits, but you've now moved on to something completely different. So got to be very careful when using this, which is why I keep reiterating versions and like doing it the player data way. So anywho, we're gonna quickly go and ask, why is this red underlined? It's declared by its value not read. It's not assignable type. Oh, because I said it had to be a player visits, but it might not be. So we actually have to do player visits or null. Yeah, that's fine. And so we're going to call this player stats incoming. And that is just so that I just hate null. I don't want null anywhere in my code. So this is from Meta, from their server. We'll make it look better. And the reason we use undefined is because TypeScript uses undefined. That's a personal preference. If you like null, you're technically allowed to use it, but I think you're going to run into more problems, so I would recommend using undefined. It is what it is. So now that we've got our player stats incoming value, we can say if player stats incoming is defined, then we want to do something there. And if it's not defined, we need to create one. And so I'm thinking the answer here is to create a let. No, we're going to create it. Yeah, sorry, my brain is, I haven't done player data since I recorded that video. So I literally copy pasted to all my worlds. So what we do is we start by creating a blank version. So we say constant player stats equals, and we say it's of type player visits, and then equals curly braces, and then we can say it needs values for last visit at, which is date.now, which you should remember from previous videos. Date.now returns the epoch in milliseconds, time since the epoch in milliseconds, which is nice. And then we got one more visit, which is total visits, which we know is actually this value total visits right here. So we'll pass that in, total visits and comma. And now that we've got our player stats set up, we can see if player stats is incoming, we then theoretically have the previous player stats. Now we obviously don't need the previous player stats because both of these values can be set from everything in here. But if there was a value we needed to pass over, let's go into our definitions and add one called previous visit at :number. There we go, just so we can have one more visit at, control save. Just so we can have one more. In this case, we'd need to use a zeroed out value because there is no previous visits yet. But if there is player stats incoming, then we can say previous visit, which would be player stats dot previous visit equals the player stats incoming dot last visit at. And so now we've updated the previous visit to be the last visit. And the only thing we need to do is to update the world storage or world persistent variable. So we'll call world dot persistent storage dot set player variable, and then we'd set the player and comma key, which is leaderboards dot player persistent variables dot JSON dot sample JSON, and we set that to the player stats value. And I am definitely getting to the end of my brain power here, so let's quickly walk through this and see how we can make sure that this is working correctly. I'd like to add a console log so we can see this on the console. So we'll say console.log json.stringify parentheses player stats. Okay, so running through this real quick, we've done all of our normal visit stuff from earlier. That stuff works. The one new thing here is we're doing player stats incoming, which is either going to be defined if they've been here before or undefined if this is their first time. Then player stats is going to define a default value for all the values, which uses date.now for last visit at. It uses the total visits from the other persistent number. We could have, like if we didn't have persistent number, we could increase this number inside of here by adding one over here using the previous value. We're just going to use this number variable for now. It's fine, it's just shorter. We have previous visit at set to 0 because we don't know the value. This would have been 0 had we not been doing a number persistent variable. And then if player stats incoming, meaning this value was defined because they'd been here before, we can then update the previous visit at. if they've not been here before, this value will stay 0, which could have some pretty crazy effects depending on how you're using the previous visit at somewhere. It might make sense to make previous visit at also date dot now. Honestly, that might be the way to go. We're going to actually do that. So we'll say else, because I think if you're following along, this is important to make sure you're not causing yourself any harm later. Previous visit at equals player stats dot last visit at. All right, so we've set this to be the same value. So what we'll see the first time this loads on the console is that the previous visit and last visit will be the same value. But then the next time they come in, the previous visit will be the same value as before, but not the same as the last visit. And so we just need to enter the world twice. Pretty simple. Give that a second. I don't think our NPC is going to engage with this because they will once when they glitch in, but their variable doesn't store. At least I don't think it does. It might store inside of a session. I guess let's check it real quick. So here, it's empty because it's brand new. We'll click clear. I'm going to jump into preview mode, and it did work. And we can see that both numbers there end in 918. Now if we leave and jump back in, we can see that the first one ends in 853 and the second one ends at 918, just like before. And if we do that again, we should see 853 take the right side. Perfect. Nice. So working just as intended. Pretty freaking fantastic. Wow. Okay, just over an hour. Not too bad for a pretty complex topic. And I hope this helps. I'm so excited about world storage. That is incredible. So many use cases for this. There's so many things you can do with persistent storage and leaderboards. I hope you'll have a fun time. I'm going to go enjoy my Sunday. Hope you have a great Sunday as well. Bye! Great week. It could be any day of the week. I don't know when you're watching this. All right, bye.